Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are once again acing articulations. Specifically, we're going to look at the Articulation Designer. Now, the Articulation Designer itself is fairly complicated, so I think it's worth splitting this tutorial into three parts. This is the first part of a three-part series on the Articulation Designer. Now, the Articulation Designer is going to be where we can customize our articulations or create new articulations. And there's a lot of things we can do with it, including changing the characters or the playback or the positioning. So before we dive into the Articulation Designer itself, I just want to pull up the Articulation Selection dialog box, which you get whenever you click on a note with the Articulation tool, to show you a couple things related to getting to the Articulation Designer. So this library of articulations are going to be listed in this dialog box, and we have some options down here on the bottom left: edit, duplicate, delete, and one more on the bottom right: create. And what those will do is exactly what they say. When you press edit, it will bring up the Articulation Designer. So what you're doing is editing the whatever you have selected. Duplicate will do just that. It will duplicate that articulation and create a new one. And then delete, if you have got one selected, it will delete that articulation. And create will create a fresh articulation from scratch, and we can create an articulation that way as well. As a best practice, I would suggest that the best thing to do is to duplicate an articulation that's going to match closely to the parameters that you're going to want your new articulation to have. Instead of going through create and starting fresh, because there's so many options, and sometimes it's better to just have most of them set and then just change the ones that you need to in order to create a new articulation. So again, it's better to use a duplicate most of the time, and you'll see me doing that a bunch in these videos. So how do you get to the Articulation Designer? I just showed you two ways. You can hit create, and that will bring up a basically blank articulation that you can start from scratch. Or you can press edit to edit any one, and we'll have some values filled in, and you can go from there. Or if you have a articulation in the score already, there's a couple ways to get directly to the Articulation Designer of that particular articulation. The first is just double-clicking the handle. We'll bring up the Articulation Designer. Or you can right-click the handle to bring up the contextual menu, and it's the second option here, Edit Articulation Definition. And that will also bring up the designer. Or if you have the articulation selected, you can choose Edit Articulation from the Articulation menu, and it will bring up the same box. Or you can get there directly from the selection tool, not even being in the articulation tool. Just right-click on the articulation, and again, Edit Articulation Definition will bring you directly there. Okay? So let's explore that Articulation Designer a little, shall we? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate this articulation, the accent with a tenuto. I'm going to duplicate that and then edit it. And I'm going to walk you through this window. Now, I said this is going to be in three parts. In this first part, I'm mainly going to deal with the top part except for playback. In the second video, I'm going to deal specifically with playback of articulations. And in the third video, I'll deal with positioning. And positioning is quite involved in and of itself, so that's you have that to look forward to. All right, so in this Articulation Designer dialog box, what we have in the upper left is it'll tell you which articulation you're editing, in this case number 8. And we can actually just change to a different one just by using these arrows if we want. We don't necessarily have to cancel out of here and go to another one and, and press edit. We can just do it there. There's an option here, display on screen only, do not print. And if you have that checked, whenever you use that articulation, it will do just that. It will only display and it will not print. That could be handy if you want to have some playback effect, for example, on some notes, but you don't necessarily want to show the performer that on the page. You can use the display on screen only for something like that. All right. And then here we have the next section is where we're going to deal with the symbols of the articulation itself. Now, every articulation basically has two symbols. It has a main symbol and a flipped symbol. And actually, in the articulation selection dialog box, you'll see two separate symbols. You'll see the top one will be the main, and the bottom one will be the flipped. All right, and what this is you can actually set these differently, and in some cases, like this particular articulation, you do have to use separate characters for the main and the flipped because this is a combined articulation. Um, it's not the same upside down and right side up, right? So in this case, we do have to use two different characters to get the main, the flipped version for this combined articulation, right? And then below that, we have symbol options. And this is actually more flexibility where what this says is when placed above a note, use the main symbol. And then the other one is when placed below a note, use the flipped symbol. And of course, we can change either of these to either option. And in some cases, you might want to use only the main symbol. So whether or not the symbols are different in the main and flipped versions, you could just choose main symbol, right? There are some articulations that actually use that combination, and of course you can have it both use flipped, but I don't know why you would do that, etc. And actually, other than the fact that what you're doing is using different characters in this case, sometimes like a lot of the articulations are the same upwards and downwards, like the regular accent, right? It doesn't, and it actually uses the same character. It's not a separate character for the regular accent, but it still uses main symbol and flip symbol. And there's one more reason for that, in that it has to do with positioning. There's some extra positioning functionality that you can use between the main and flipped symbol. So it is sort of critical most of the time to have these set this way, all right? And below that, you'll see an option that's grayed out, copy main symbol, and it's grayed out. There's an option vertical, and the other option is horizontal, which is grayed out. And this will only become available in a certain when a certain positioning is set, and that is actually manual. And you'll see that option become available to you. But all of the other positionings, this will be grayed out. And when I talk about positioning and I get to the manual positioning, I will talk about this option as well. All right. So that's the symbol options, and let's go back to the symbols themselves. So you can see for each symbol, main and flipped, there's two options here. You have character and shape, character and shape. Now, character is just going to refer to a character within the font set. In this case, it's going to be the Maestro font set, since that's the default music font used in Finale's default file, right? And when you press the button here that says main with character selected, what you're going to get is the symbol selection dialog box. Now this is going to be a list of all of the characters that are available in the Maestro font set, which I'm circling here. You can see that it's telling you that it's Maestro font set, all right? So you can select any other character from this font set that you want. So we can actually just choose this Apple symbol if we really wanted to. And now that Apple symbol will be the main symbol font character, right? We could do the same with the flipped, and we can choose something else, like the 15, for example, right? And we can use those two characters for the articulation. And when I click OK, you'll see that in my articulation selection dialog box now, you'll see both of those characters as available in the articulation. So if I were to select this now, as it's above, you'll see the main symbol, and if I put it below, you'll see the flipped symbol, which is the 15 there, right? So you could do that if you so wanted to. Another thing you could do besides characters is shapes. So if you select shape, you can, and then you press the main button here, you'll get the shape selection dialog box, which is going to be different than the font selection. And these are going to be the set of shapes that comes with Finale's default file, and you can add to this and edit any of these as you want with the edit, duplicate, delete, and create function as well. And that whole thing is another complicated situation, which I may end up doing a video just on the shape designer itself. So possibly look forward to that. And so you can choose any shape you want. And then that will be the character, any shape that you want here, etc. All right. And then finally, we can set the font differently, right? And when we press the set font button, it will change the font if you're using character only. Like it's not going to have any effect on shape here. So, but if these are set to character and you press set font, you're setting the font for both of these, by the way. So you set font, and currently it'll tell you that it's using the default music font, which is Maestro, but we can change this to a different music font. Let's change it to Engraver. And you can also change the size and whether or not it's italics or whatnot, right? And of course, the characters will be different because sometimes in between music fonts, the characters don't always exist in the same slots. So if you press the main button here, you'll see that it's still in slot 240, which happens to be what that apple was, and it's a different character, right? So you can choose a different character again just by doing this, etc. And you can create a unique articulation with a different font, right? And then there's one other thing you can do with setting fonts here. You can actually use normal text fonts. And I was thinking of a useful situation for this. You know, in guitar music, we can have fingerings for the left hand, and they're indicated by P, I, M, and A. So it might be handy to actually set some articulations for those fingerings. So if we can set you know, Times New Roman, and let's say we're going to italicize it. 24 is probably too big, so let's make it 12. And now, when we go in here, you'll see that it's telling me that the fonts is Times New Roman, and I can actually just type it here instead of having to find the P. Just type P, and it'll show up for you. And same with the flipped. We want to make it the same, P. And so we could have the P as an articulation. And for a fingering, that might make more sense than to do the P as a text expression or something like that, because the P will, you know, it will move when you transpose the note, right? So sometimes stuff like that is better used as an articulation. But that's how you would use a normal text font as an articulation. All right, so I think that's where I'm going to stop right now. Come back for the second part of this series of videos, and I'm going to talk about playback effect. All right, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you on part 2.